Hey, this is Mr. Mitchell with another science video. Go ahead and copy down the questions and we'll talk a little bit about taxonomy. Scientists have identified more than 1 million kinds of organisms on Earth, plants, animals, etc. And biologists classify these organisms. The classification of organisms is based on their similarities, how they are alike. And there's a huge classification system that is called binomial nomenclature, and we're going to get to that in just a second. But there's actually a term called the study of how living things are classified, and that's what taxonomy is. Taxonomy is the study of how living things are classified. It's quite clever how this is done. I'll kind of give you the basic gist of it. In the 1750s, Linnaeus devised a system of naming organisms. And that system that Linnaeus came up with was called binomial nomenclature. And binomial nomenclature literally means two words or two names. Now that may not make much sense, but I bet you've heard of some of the binomial nomenclature that is used with different organisms. Now keep in mind this is not just animals, this is also plants and actually some other species as well. In those two names, one of the names is the genus of the organism and one of the names is the species of the organisms. For example, the genus shares characteristics. For example, here we have a cat that has sharp retractable claws, and here we have a cat that has sharp retractable claws, but they're not the same species. They happen to be just the same genus, and they happen to be of the genus, it's all in Latin, Felis. Latin was the language used in the time, in the 1700s, as far as science goes. So that's how all these names in binomial nomenclature are labeled. So both this house cat and this puma are in the Felis genus. So they're going to have Felis as their first name in the binomial nomenclature, but they're going to be different species. A species is a group of similar organisms that can mate with each other and produce offspring that can also mate and reproduce. So you can have a house cat here, but the offspring of a house cat would not be a puma. Same thing here. A puma would not have an offspring that would be a house cat. And that's how they are different in species. And you do have some species that kind of intermix a little bit as far as reproduction. But the key is if the species can produce offspring that can also reproduce that species. So when you get into the donkey and mule type argument, then you are in fact talking about different species because you cannot have another reproduction in that case. Well, anyway, the puma here is called the Felis concolor, or concolor is how it looks like, Felis concolor. And you have this house cat here, which is the Felis domesticus. And I don't have these written down right here, but that's okay. You get the name, the gist of it. You're going to have two names that can describe, well, they describe pretty much everything living. Everything that is a Felis domesticus is a house cat. Everything that is a Felis concolor is a puma. You may wonder what humans are. Humans are Homo sapiens. Homo is the genus, sapiens is the species. And you can tell this is one incredibly smart Homo sapien. He's wearing an Alabama jersey. In fact, this is Alabama's coach. And I want to show you some more examples, and I have a whole slide for that. Now here we are. Here we have several plants, peas, onions, mangoes, and so on. And here's what their binomial nomenclature is. You can see we have all these Latin names that goes all the way down to soybeans. I imagine that's soy despite the A there. Although I wonder the typing capability of whoever typed this in as we go down to animals. We have frog, which is a rana hexadecta. Datella, boy, I'm struggling with the pronunciation here, all the way down to a common, well, that's how I think they misspelled something. It's got to be common carp, which is a Cyprinus carpio. So for every living thing, plant, animal, there is binomial nomenclature. There are two names, the genus and the species, which can categorize them. On to something to continue. It's not just going to be genus and species. We have the genus and the species that we've talked about, but there are actually 8 different levels. And the most specific of the levels, of course, is the species. But we have all the way from domain down to kingdom, then the phyla, then the class, then the order, then the family, then the genus, then the species. So we actually have, say, for the house cat, you could look up what domain it's in, which will be the animal domain. You can look up it'll be the Euchara domain, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but it'll be the animal kingdom, and then all the way down the classifications to where you get to the more specific ones, the genus and the species. There are 3 domains. There are 3 domains. So every plant and every animal is classified as either a bacteria domain, archaea domain, or the one that by far most of them in are eukarya domain. The bacteria, of course, you've heard of bacteria. Bacteria are prokaryotes. And the term prokaryote, you'll hear quite a bit when we're doing biology this year. But prokaryotes have cells that do not have a nucleus. That's the center of the cell. They do not have a nucleus. And prokaryotes have just that one cell, one unicellular cell that does not have a nucleus. Now, archaea, they're also unicellular prokaryotes, but they have a different structure. You remember whenever we studied the bacteria type stuff that was on the bottom of the ocean near hydrothermal vents, you know, that's where you had the magma that came up from the bottom of the ocean. That bacteria type stuff would be labeled archaea. So there's not much in the world that would really be labeled archaea, but it just doesn't seem to fit in the bacteria or eukarya domains. But anyway, the one that is most common is eukarya, and that's the rest. You have animals, plants, protists, fungi, and they are all eukaryotes. Eukaryotes, their cells contain a nucleus. So the whole deal about prokaryotes and eukaryotes is whether they contain a nucleus or not. That's in their cells. Now, we are eukaryotes, which means our cells have a nucleus. So if you have a nucleus, and that's a bad S, but that's okay. To have a nucleus in the cells, you're eukaryotes instead of the bacteria and archaea prokaryotes. But anyway, there happen to be 4 kingdoms. 4 kingdoms are plants, animals, and I'm not going to write the whole thing. Plants, animals, and I think I already mentioned this before, fungi, like mushrooms, and protists, like seaweed. When you get to phylum, I'm not going to mention a whole lot about every one of these, but for example, in humans, the phylum we are in is called chordata. Chordata means that we have a backbone. So every animal that has a backbone is going to be in the phyla Chordata. Once you get down into class, it would separate farther down. For example, there's a class where you just have birds. Every single bird is in that class. And the farther down you go into order, family, genus, species, it tells you what more specific bird it is. And that's kind of the general gist of this taxonomy stuff, the binomial nomenclature. And we won't have to know every single one of them by any means, but we are studying the taxonomy of all of these classifications. Hope you've learned a little bit about taxonomy.